the question I'd like to talk about in this live session. My name is Andrew Stotz, and I have been looking at the research on recessions and doing my own research, and I see the signs of an upcoming recession very clearly. It's possible that that recession is already happening. I've done considerable research to try to come to that conclusion. And so I'm not going to speak about that. The question I want to speak about is, are you ready? In preparation for an impending recession, you as a business leader are expected to lead. It's your time. And leading means being proactive. One of the lessons I learned in my life, in my own business, in this case, Coffee Works, is I just didn't have enough experience in the old days when I was younger to see a recession coming or a collapse coming, as we had in the Asian financial crisis in 1997. And so naturally, it was hard to prepare. But that's no longer an excuse now for myself and for many others. So, what does it mean to be proactive? It means that you've got to start assessing your company's financial health and identifying vulnerabilities. It could be high debt or falling profits or low profit margins. You've also got to look at implementing cost-cutting measures and exploring whether you could diversify revenue streams. You've also got to get employees involved. It's a brutal time if we go through a recession. It's hard for everybody. And of course, there's the customer relationships. Without the customers, you don't have a business. And finally, thinking about some contingency plans and also, what you can do to deepen those customer relationships. So I think that let's just talk briefly about why I think that there's an impending recession. The first thing is that we've had a sudden shock of higher prices and higher interest rates. In fact, the interest rate shock is enormous. Of course, no one can predict a recession and whether it's going to happen, how severe it's going to be. So I'm not here to say that I have the exact formula for predicting that, but I think there's enough indicators out there to say it's coming. And you may even see it right now. So as a business leader, really your job is to be proactive and prepare for the economic downturn. It's not enough to say, well, I didn't know. How would I know? And failure to properly prepare can bring dire circumstances for your company. And I can remember, again, going back to the 1997 crisis here we had in Thailand, which I don't think we're going into a crisis that big. But I can say that it was an extremely painful situation that people were experiencing. Now, maybe someone would ask, well, Andrew, why do you say there's an upcoming recession? Because, it seems like things are not too bad. Well, okay, here's a few signs that I see. Number one is the inverted yield curve. It's predicted every recession since 1968. Is it not going to predict this one? I think it's going to predict this one. A next one is unemployment. Basically, what some people will say is, Andrew, how can we have a recession when unemployment's so low? Well, that's the whole point. If you look at a graph of unemployment, you see that every time that unemployment comes down to a real low level, that's the sign that a recession is just about to happen. Look what's happening in the US right now with negotiations on wages, healthcare workers. We had railroad strike. We had auto workers strike. People are demanding that they get more money. And keep in mind that profit margins of companies are still strong, very strong. So workers have a right to ask for that, I suspect, if the company's strong. So they are asking for that, and companies are going to have to deal with that. Now, if you're not having a leading level of profit, then that's also going to be a profit problem for you. Another sign that I see of an upcoming recession is the slowdown in bank lending. And particularly in the US, I can start to see that we've already got a slowdown in bank lending for companies, let's say commercial purposes. Consumer and real estate loans are flattening. And I think that those will turn down. And then another sign that I see is weak consumer demand, which I think is a serious challenge. So the first step to trying to deal with this for your company is to look at the finances of your company. In fact, this is a time that some people may hide from the finances and not make the tough decisions. But the fact is if you can make the tough decisions now before the recession hits, you're going to be ahead of your competitors. And so what you want to do is look at your balance sheet, your income statement, cash flows, and look at the projections. You want to look for signs of vulnerability like high debt, declining profit margins, not enough cash on the balance sheet. This is the time to understand your company's financial position. Now, the other thing is during a recession, cost control becomes critical. You want to evaluate your company's operational efficiency and identify areas where you can cut costs. There's a great book that I read many years ago called The 6 Months Fix by Gary Sutton. And I can tell you that book is amazing when it comes to turning around companies. But the thing that I learned from that book is the only thing you can control now, right now in your business and in your life is costs. So focus on how you can reduce those costs and increase operational efficiency. It could be leaner processes. Yesterday, I went to an event organized by OPEX, and they talked about lean as one tool to improve the profitability of a company. It could be about negotiating contracts with suppliers and trying to get better prices there for your raw materials. It could be about optimizing your supply chain, maybe looking for new suppliers or other places to get things. Basically, reducing unnecessary expenses can help you get through this situation. Now, another thing to think about is where are your revenue streams? In the case of CoffeeWorks, in the last down cycle we just had related to COVID, coffee shops, restaurants, hotels, offices, all these things were closed. So it was a challenge to try to get revenue in a down market. So you want to try to look for ways to diversify that revenue stream. And when I talk about diversification, it means that the consumer behaviors and the drivers of the customers in that segment have a different behavior. So you could have a segment, let's say tourism, and you could have a segment that is domestic. And those are going to have somewhat separate, different behaviors. It could be new products, it could be new markets, it could be different customer segments. Look at this type of diversification because it could help. Now, I do want to raise some caution. Be careful about diversification when you're going into a crisis like this, because you could drain your resources and not actually get the revenue. One of the things that I like to say when it comes to strategy in business is follow your DNA. And I know in our business at CoffeeWorks, our DNA is not retail, websites, B2C. It's not our strength. And so we resisted during the crisis time of COVID to shift into that. Some people may say, well, you missed an opportunity, but I would say we stuck to what we knew and we didn't overextend ourselves with a very limited resources, which I want to tell a story about the 1997 crisis. And what I learned was don't work too hard during an economic crisis. Now that may sound strange because the whole thing that ends up happening is you end up working like crazy to survive an economic crisis. But my point is that during an economic crisis, whether you work 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours may not have a major impact on the revenue that you're going to get in your company. Because the fact is that the revenue is going to be driven by the market. And it could be that the market's just down at that time. So be careful about not overextending yourself physically, personally. And let's talk about employees, right? You want to try to, have a stable base of employees in your company. Remember that recessionary times can be tough. So you want to prepare your employees by getting them involved in the cost cutting and the preparedness to weather the storm. Get them involved at building the protections that you're building in your business. And that's can also help them, to try to, understand what's going on in the world, and therefore be careful about overcommitting personally to personal investments or personal spending. Next is customers. You want to focus on strong customer relationships. Ultimately, they're going to be going through the same pain as you. And so you want to keep the connection with your customers strong. And you want to be looking for ideas, providing some support and strength, and building the relationship at the hardest time. And you want to focus on exceptional customer service and value to retain those existing customers. That exceptional customer service is going to feel great when times are tough. You also want to be transparent with your clients about the changes that you're making in your business. Ultimately, the loyalty will provide your company's stable foundation to weather an economic turbulence. We had a particular customer that was hit by an event. We had a hotel that was hit by protests in Thailand, and it basically shut down their occupancy to maybe from 80, 90% down to 10. And we contacted them and we worked with them closely. But the main thing that we did is we gave them a discounted price. And that's a shocker because, we don't normally, companies don't come up, suppliers don't come up with price discounts. But we saw, of course, that their volume was much lower as they were at 10% capacity. And so we felt like until the protests subsided, we would try to support them with the balance sheet strength that we had at the time. So look at your unique strengths, and how you can support customers. Maybe it's training. Maybe it's like taking the staff and really helping them, learn something. So let's talk about capital. Do you have enough cash? Do you have a lot of debt on your balance sheet? Are you making enough profit margin? This is a challenge, right? Because gaining access to new capital during a recession is nearly impossible. So you have to be prepared already, or you may have, if I'm right that there's a recession coming, then you've got to prepare right now. So you want to evaluate your options related to additional capital. It could be just selling some assets that you've been thinking about selling. Last night, I met with a business owner, and he has some assets that he wants to sell. And I said, sell them now. If I'm right and there's a recession coming, there's not going to be a market for those assets because everybody's going to be wanting to sell assets. And there's not going to be that many buyers. If I'm wrong, well, okay, you've accelerated your process. You didn't get as great a price, but still the risk of being wrong and waiting can be huge. So you want to look for additional lines of credit if you could, other loans, equity financing, and establish relationships with the banks and financial institutions to try to make sure that you've got that access to capital. Another thing is just creating contingency plans about how you're going to respond if this happens, right? It's going to help you to react swiftly if a recession does come. And of course, stay up to date. I'm trying to stay up to date on the indicators related to GDP and unemployment rates, consumer spending, those types of things. Stay aware of these things and what's going on. Ultimately, what I've learned from years of interviewing people and having now interviewed close to 800 people on my Worst Investment Ever podcast is that reducing risk has to do with intuition. Pay attention to what signals your body and mind is sending to you about the economy and the situation. Ultimately, it's impossible to predict a recession. We try, but to consistently predict, it's just very difficult. So you've got to be prudent in your business practices. So by conducting this financial health check, I've talked about cost-cutting strategies, trying to diversify revenue streams carefully, building resilience in your workforce, strengthening customer relationships, and ensuring that you've got access to capital, and of course, scenario planning. Your company can be in a better position to weather the economic downturn. So my challenge to you is stay vigilant, stay proactive, and stay prepared to navigate the challenges of a recession. Doing this can increase your company's chances of surviving and even thriving during that time of recession. This is what I've been thinking about this morning, and I've been working on this stuff for a while. And so I just wanted to share it today. Let's be prepared and let's make profit. This is Andrew Stotts. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you are prepared.